Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 11 nays.
The motion is defeated. Now I move, as I said I was going to do, that we set the vote to report out Judge Kavanaugh's nomination at 1:30 p.m. today.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Cornyn.
That's violating the rules of the committee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass. Mr. Flake.
The ram job continues.
Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
No.
Mr. Leahy.
No, because it violates the customs of this committee.
Mr. Durbin.
It violates them.
No.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
I strongly object. This is just totally ridiculous. What a railroad job. My answer is no, no, no.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris.
They're not answering because this is so unfair, Mr. Chairman.
Breaks our rules and customs.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 11 yeas and 8 nays.
Okay. Motion carried. I'll go to my opening statement now. We have an agenda with 10 judges who are ready to be voted on. Brent Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. Jonathan Kobus nominated the 8th Circuit and 8 district court judges. We also have 2 bills on the agenda. We will hold over S 3178, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. We will vote on S 2785, the DTARE Act, sponsored by Senators Durbin and Graham. This bill combats offensive election interference by foreign adversaries by denying entry to any foreign national who has been deemed to engage in election interference. The amendment I'll be introducing makes clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security will make this decision on who has engaged in election interference in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Any foreign national who engages or conspires to engage in improper interference in our elections should not be allowed to enter our country under any circumstances except to stand trial. Yesterday, we heard testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh regarding sexual assault allegations that date back to when the two were in high school. It was difficult and emotional for both of them. At the end of the day, the 3 witnesses Dr. Ford named denied any knowledge of the event she described. Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations. The alleged behavior is inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Hundreds of people, including women he knew in high school, attested to his character and fundamental decency as a person, both in high school and now. He is widely regarded as an excellent husband, father, friend, coach, professor, and judge. He has an exemplary record of being at the forefront of women's advancement in the legal profession, and he's been through 6 FBI full-time background investigations, and no issues of sexual misconduct were uncovered. It's a fundamental aspect of fairness and due process that the accuser have the burden of proving allegations. It's true yesterday's hearing was not a trial, but trials have rules based on common sense notions of fairness and due process, not the other way around. A person had allegations made against him in a public way, and his reputation and livelihood were at stake. It was only fair that his accuser had the burden of proof. In my opinion, this wasn't met. Hey, you folks that are photographers know that you're supposed to sit down. Maybe you just ought to leave the room if you don't know what the rules are. I found Dr. Ford's testimony credible and believe she's sincere in her version of the facts. But I also found Judge Kavanaugh's testimony credible and sincere. Ultimately, the existing evidence, including the statement of 3 alleged eyewitnesses named by Dr. Ford, refutes Dr. Ford's version of the facts. There is simply no reason to deny Judge Kavanaugh a seat on the Supreme Court on the basis of evidence presented to us. I reopened the hearing at the assistance of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford wanted to be heard, and we gave her that opportunity. Not one question to Dr. Ford was disrespectful in any way. She was treated with courtesy and dignity as I promised her. But the questions my Democrat colleagues asked Judge Kavanaugh were unequivocally and universally hostile. My colleagues first claimed that the Senate doesn't confirm Supreme Court nominees in midterm elections. The Washington Post fact checker said that's false. Indeed, Justice can we have quiet, please? I would expect the same quiet for other people on the committee when they speak. Anyway, indeed, Justice Breyer and Kagan were both confirmed in midterm elections. Then the second attempt was to argue that we needed to request all Judge Kavanaugh's executive branch records. But they completely ignored the fact that we did not request all of Justice Kagan's executive branch records. Indeed, her most recent and relevant executive branch records from the Solicitor General's office were not requested, even despite the fact that Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most Even though Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most powerful court in the country, issuing 307 opinions and joining hundreds of others, we received over 480,000 pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time on the executive branch. This was more pages of such documents than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. In short, it was the most thorough and transparent confirmation process at all. I'm going to put the rest of my statement in the record because I'm sure a lot of people are irritated right now, and I'll let them express that irritation. We'll go by seniority, so I'll call on Senator Feinstein and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very disappointed that we're here today voting on this nomination, especially in light of the testimony that we heard just yesterday. My Republican colleagues spent their time at the hearing focused exclusively on policy and on partisanship and process. The majority argued that the sexual assault Dr. Ford experienced was nothing more than a Democratic smear campaign that I am allegedly orchestrating. My staff and I were accused of leaking Dr. Ford's letter, which we did not. We were accused of leaking Deborah Ramirez's letter, which we did not. We were said to have refused to participate in the partisan, quote, investigation, end quote. Yet it is the Republicans who have refused to talk to Debbie Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. Republicans also failed to mention Democrats were not notified and had no idea the chairman's staff had been communicating with Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, and apparently at least 2 other individuals who have not been named. Instead, Democrats learned about this outreach when various letters or emails appeared in the press. And in one case, we learned about the Republican staff outreach at 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. Ironically, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have gone so far as to say this whole situation was nothing more than a nefarious attempt at political theater. I understand why they did that. The Senate is a political body. However, I was shocked to see Judge Kavanaugh take the same tone and strategy. Candidly, in the 25 years on this committee, I have never seen a nominee for any position behave in that manner. Judge Kavanaugh used as much political rhetoric as my Republican colleagues, and what's more, he went on the attack. He yelled at Democrats for having the temerity to express our frustration for not having access to over 90% of his record, and said that some Democratic members were, quote, an embarrassment, end quote. He'd accused Democrats of, quote, lying in wait, end quote, and replacing, quote, advice and consent with search and destroy, end quote. He even went so far as to say that Dr. Ford's allegations were nothing more than, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2018 election, end quote, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, end quote. Unbelievable. This was not someone who reflected an impartial temperament or the fairness and even-handedness one would see in a judge. This was someone who was aggressive and belligerent. I have never seen someone who wants to be elevated to the highest court in our country behave in that manner. In stark contrast, the person who testified yesterday and demonstrated a balanced temperament was Dr. Ford. She gave powerful testimony about her experience of being physically and sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh. She started by saying how she was terrified to be before the committee, but she felt it was her civic duty to tell us what happened to her. She recounted her experience, and I quote, "I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me," end quote. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time, end quote. Another quote, "Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I didn't want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and pretend that it didn't happen," end quote. She was poised, she was credible, and she should be believed. Unfortunately, despite assuring Dr. Ford her allegations would be taken seriously and she would be treated respectfully, that is not what ultimately happened. As I noted in my statement yesterday, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle had their minds made up before one word was uttered. A week ago, the majority leader declared, quote, "In the near future, Judge Kavanaugh will be on the United States Supreme Court. So, my friends, keep the faith. Don't get rattled by all this. We're going to plow right through it," end quote. This was not about ensuring a fair process. This was about doing the bare minimum. And finally, to my Republican colleagues who are so upset about the time that has passed, let's be clear. Dr. Ford asked for confidentiality, and that's what I did. We all know that if I had referred her allegations to the FBI when she would not come forward, there would have been nothing to do. the FBI would have had an anonymous allegation with no name, no contact information, and no way to follow up. In addition, Dr. Ford's allegations were referred to the FBI on September 12th, over 2 weeks ago. If the president and the Republican majority had asked for the FBI to do an investigation at that time, like we asked, it would likely be finished by now. And most importantly, when Judge Kavanaugh has talked to Republicans repeatedly, none of us have spoken to or questioned Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, or the polygraph examiner. None of us have talked to or questioned James Roach, Lynn Brooks, Liz Swisher, Tom Kaine, or Chris Dudley. Not one senator, as far as I know, has had the opportunity to or question Deborah Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. My colleagues are right that we should not rush to judgment, and it's not fair to assume Judge Kavanaugh is guilty without gathering the information. But it's equally unfair to have heard from a credible, poised, and brave witness and simply ignore what we heard and move forward immediately. I don't know Deborah Ramirez. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. I don't know Judy Swetnick. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. But I do know this. Dr. Ford provided credible, powerful testimony that deserves to be considered and not dismissed as a partisan smear campaign, which it was not. In my opening statement yesterday, I talked about the differences between Me Too and the Year of the Woman, and I highlighted the seriousness of sexual assault and harassment. I started out by saying, I hoped we would do better and show women that our country, our committee, has in fact changed. This isn't a political battle for power, as some have said. This is a serious undertaking with serious allegations. While the Republican strategy is no longer attack the victim, it is ignore the victim. The entire country is watching now how we handle these serious allegations. It is, in fact, a real test for the United States Senate and for our country to see how we treat women, especially women who are survivors of sexual assault. I believe we can do better, and I hope we are better. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a longer statement that addresses some of the attacks regarding my office's handling of Dr. Ford's allegations and the Republican administration.
Obviously, without objection, those will be included. Before I call on Senator Hatch, since this keeps coming up about the FBI investigation, I'd like to repeat what you've heard from me so many times, but I guess we never get this, get people understanding. We can't learn anything from the FBI that we can't learn ourselves. The Senate has our own constitutional duty and our own investigators to follow up on these allegations. I don't think we should discredit the Senate's constitutional duty of oversight as a co-equal independent branch of government. If the people on the other side of the aisle sincerely want an FBI investigation, I would ask why they did not notify me of Dr. Ford's then confidential letter way back in July so the FBI could weigh in. The FBI would honor confidentiality, and so would I. And I've had 38 years reputation of protecting constitutionality or confidentiality of whistleblowers. Another span of time for an FBI investigation is, as my Democrat colleagues have called for, or even more recently people outside calling for, would result in another time of brutal attacks on Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh and their families. They don't deserve those sorts of vile threats that they're receiving, and it's unacceptable. Dr. Ford has stated no objections to an FBI investigation, so why has the need for an FBI investigation only come to our attention here in the last several days, probably less than 2 weeks? It's been 60 days since Dr. Ford's letter was made public. Then we've had some comment about why we didn't investigate Ramirez. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them, unlike our Democratic colleagues, some of whom sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the committee.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting, but could we have order?
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I would agree on the order. The order would be that we go back and forth, and apparently you're going to have 2 Republicans speaking and 1 Democrat. Is that what the chairman's doing?
That's what, absolutely. After I get done, and I'm not giving an opening statement, I'm explaining, as a chairman ought to explain, the work of the committee to people that don't seem to understand it. I'll call on Senator Hatch when I'm done, and then I'm going to call on you, Senator Leahy. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them. Unlike our Democrat colleagues, some of who sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the chairman. I first learned of her allegations when they became public in the article New Yorker, published late Sunday evening, September 23rd. My staff immediately contacted her counsel, asking when she was available for an interview with committee investigators. The next afternoon, Monday, September 24, her counsel responded that Ms. Ramirez, quote, has accurately relayed what she recalls to the New Yorker, her counsel, end of quote. Her counsel added, however, that, quote, she would welcome an investigation by the FBI into this investigation and would cooperate with such. On appropriate terms, she would also agree to be interviewed in person, end of quote. Over the 24th and the 25th of this month, my staff repeatedly asked Ms. Ramirez's counsel 2 questions before setting up a call to discuss her allegations so that such a call could actually be meaningful and useful. Whether, number 1, whether she had, quote, any other evidence, including other statements, in addition to those that are contained in the New Yorker article, end of quote. And 2, whether she was, quote, willing to provide her evidence, including her testimony, to committee investigators, end of quote. My staff repeatedly made clear that it welcomed, quote, the receipt of Ms. Ramirez or anyone else's evidence in the form of a letter or email to the chairman or ranking member, a letter or email from counsel to the chairman or ranking member, or a statement to committee investigators. Ms. Ramirez's counsel has still not provided any evidence to committee staff. If evidence emerged, we, of course, would proceed as appropriate. My staff also acted swiftly to set up an interview with Judge Kavanaugh. He unequivocally denied Ms. Ramirez's allegations. I regret that my Democrat colleagues again failed to timely bring this relevant information to his attention. The article makes clear that some Democratic senators have known of Ms. Ramirez's allegations for some time, and it quotes one Democrat member of the committee as saying this allegation, quote, should be fully investigated, end of quote. That is exactly what I have done and what could have been done easier if Senate Democrats had not kept the information to themselves. And then my last one will deal with the Sedgwick allegations. 2 days ago, we became aware of the allegations of Julie Swetnick. She claimed that Judge Kavanaugh was involved in a gang rape ring around Washington, D.C. area in the 1980s. My staff has been trying to obtain evidence of her claims and interview her since Sunday, 3 days before she made her allegation public. But her attorney has so far not cooperated in the investigation. By the accuser's own description, she regularly attended parties where she knew girls were being gang raped. Instead of telling authorities about this serious criminal activity, she continued to attend them. And somehow the FBI missed Judge Kavanaugh's 6 full field background investigations while he worked in a high-profile position in the White House and the Judiciary. The fact that he was a regular participation in these gang rape parties. Now that ought to get a lot of people's attention. We had 6 full field background investigations by the FBI, and what he was accused of by Miss Sedgwick never showed up. And that ought to be, if it was that much of an activity on his part, surely the FBI would know about it. Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very difficult set of hearings and a difficult markup, and I think you've handled it very well. And I compliment all of our people on both sides of the aisle for approaching this very seriously. And it should be approached seriously. It's been 81 days since President Trump nominated Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Since then, we've reviewed more records of this nominee than for any Supreme Court nominee in history, ever. Judge Kavanaugh has testified for well over 30 hours, including in a closed session. He has answered nearly 1,300 written questions, more than all other past Supreme Court nominees combined. In the more than 12 years that Judge Kavanaugh has been a judge on the D.C. Circuit, he has built a reputation for honesty, courtesy, and integrity. His clerks and colleagues, since they sing his praises. He volunteers in the community. He's been an advocate for and mentor to his students. After Democrats unleashed the recent allegations against Judge Kavanaugh, Chairman Grassley set out a deliberative process to investigate. He has not been, as some claim, a bully. Far from it. But rather than working with us, my Democratic colleagues chose not to participate in this process. Indeed, before yesterday, they had never even asked Judge Kavanaugh a single question about these allegations. And yet again and again, their refrain has been the same: delay, delay, delay. I can't blame them for that, because they are partisan people, and I guess they figured that would be to their advantage. Well, it's not. When we heard the serious allegations made by Dr. Ford, we recognized that we needed to hear her testimony. Chairman Grassley was committed to making sure that she had a safe forum in which to tell her story. He tried to make it a forum of her choosing, either public or private. Although it appears the lawyers my Democratic colleagues suggested to her had other plans. Yesterday, we finally were able to hear from Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. I want to personally thank them. But I want to thank them both for attending the hearing and speaking to the committee and to all of us and to the American public as well. After the hearing, I saw that Mr. Avenatti decided that the best place for his client to give her first interview was on a show called The Circus. The title is fitting, because that is what this process has become. All of my Democratic colleagues have said for weeks that they will vote against Judge Kavanaugh. Here's where I stand. We can't allow more time for new smears to. We can't allow more time for new smears to damage Judge Kavanaugh, his family, his reputation, the reputation of the court, and of course the reputation of the country. We cannot allow more time for partisans on the left to try to beat Judge Kavanaugh into submission. We can prolong this process, knowing that in the meantime, we shouldn't prolong it, is what I'm saying, without knowing that in the meantime, Judge Kavanaugh's family and our country will be dragged through the mud. Or we can end this circus And frankly, we've reached a point where it's time to end the circus. It's time to show some dignity around here. It's time to vote. People can make their closing statements. They can vote whatever way they want to. Nobody's telling them what to do. And frankly, we've had enough time on this to choke a horse. And I just have to say, let's be fair about this. Let's vote whichever way we want to, and let's move on this. I personally am tired of all the games and all the gamesmanship that's been going on around not just this nominee, but others as well. And Mr. Chairman, as a former chairman of this committee and a chairman of 2 other committees in my time in the Senate, I want you to know that I think you've done a terrific job. You've been fair. You've been very decent in your approach. You have treated everybody with respect. You've especially treated our Democratic colleagues with respect, which they deserve. And frankly, you're a great chairman. And I think we ought to all acknowledge that and start treating our chairman with a little more respect and dignity. We all respect him. We all know what a good man he is. I also think the ranking member has been good through this process as well. I like her very much. She's very sincere. She's on the other side of this from me, but she believes in what she's doing, and I have to stand up and say she has a right to do that. And I just want her to know that I appreciate her and her leadership on this committee. But it's time to vote. It's time to quit making the political, well, you can make your political statements, but they ought to be made in lieu of the vote, and then we ought to vote this and make a final determination on where this nominee is going to go. For one,
Senator Lee.
I'm just not finished. For one, I know Judge Kavanaugh. I've known him for a long time. He has an impeccable reputation. He's well respected as a judge in this country by Democrats and Republicans who know him well. And it would be an absolute crying shame if we keep treating him like he's some sort of an imposter or some sort of a person that just can't do this job. He can do the job. He has done the job, and he's doing it on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the country, and I have a lot of confidence in him. Those who don't, they can vote no.
Senator Lee.
You know, in some ways, it feels like Alice in Wonderland around here. It's unbelievable where we are today. It's almost surreal. This Judiciary Committee is no longer an independent branch of government, and we're supposed to be. The Senate's supposed to be an independent, equal branch of government. We're no longer that, but we're an arm and a very weak arm of the Trump White House. Every semblance of independence has just disappeared. It's gone. And I think that is something historians will look at, and they'll call it a turning point in the United States Senate. This committee, after months of breaking precedent after precedent in a manic rush to fill a Supreme Court seat, is now on the verge of voting on a nominee who has been credibly accused of sexual assault, and the committee hasn't even conducted a meaningful investigation. Yesterday, we heard the powerful and courageous testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Following her testimony, I doubt that not one of us left the committee room doubting her credibility. I'm sure nobody doubted her credibility. But then, Judge Kavanaugh angrily denied the allegation, and I'll get to that shortly. But we should all agree that a credible allegation of sexual assault against a nominee to our nation's highest court demands that we proceed with the utmost caution. Our constitutional obligation, at the very least, is to investigate these allegations properly. This isn't about delaying a nomination until after the election, even though we have that precedent when the Republicans did that with Merrick Garland. This is about doing our job. This is what we're elected to do, what we're paid to do. And the first step is an FBI investigation. That has always been the first step when new derogatory information comes to light about a nominee. Even in one instance when the information was as minor as decades-old marijuana use, Republicans still made sure we had an FBI investigation. Why is Judge Kavanaugh, who is facing much more serious allegations of sexual abuse, why is he being held to a lower standard than all the nominees before him? Certainly all the nominees I've seen in 44 years. A proper investigation also means hearing from all the witnesses. That includes the 4 witnesses who signed sworn affidavits offered by Dr. Ford. And most stunningly, this committee has refused to call the sole eyewitness to the alleged assault, Mark Judge. Instead, all we have is a brief letter from Mr. Judge vaguely asserting that he has no memory of this alleged incident. Well, I'd like to ask him questions about that under oath, and a lot of us would. He has effectively nailed a do not disturb sign, and apparently the Republicans on this committee are satisfied, as if oral testimony and opportunity to question a witness is unnecessary. Now, whether you believe Judge Kavanaugh or you believe Dr. Ford, the fact that we're not allowed to hear from somebody who's said to be the sole eyewitness is outrageous. Everybody here knows that. I said yesterday that an earlier time the Senate failed Anita Hill, whom I believed. Today we're doing even worse. At the time of Anita Hill, we had an FBI investigation. We had almost 24 witnesses. Here, Republicans are not willing to do either, even if it would delay this information, or this nomination, just a matter of a week or two, certainly far short of the November election. They don't want to hear women who have relevant evidence. Is that really what the Senate Judiciary Committee has lowered itself to? I'm at a loss how Republicans could think they've heard enough about Dr. Ford's allegations and are ready to move on. I think you should look at what the reactions are you're getting around this country. Dr. Ford captivated the nation yesterday with her horrifying story of sexual assault. Every minute of her testimony was credible. She knew Brett Kavanaugh. She knew Mark Judge. This was not a case of mistaken identity. In a moment that I'll never forget, when I asked her for her strongest memory, something from the incident she couldn't escape, she testified, indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two as a teenage Judge Kavanaugh drunkenly pinned Dr. Ford down to the bed and attempted to sexually assault her. Indelible is the memory of the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two. As a member of this committee, as a former prosecutor, as a husband and a parent, I found Dr. Ford's testimony to be wholly credible. Not one member of this committee has suggested she was not, and the same cannot be said of Judge Kavanaugh. Judge Kavanaugh's veracity has been an issue every single time he's ever testified before the Senate. Whether it's repeatedly telling senators they had no role in vetting or working on various controversial Bush-era judicial nominees, something that turned out to be a blatant untruth, or whether it's testifying in response to more than 100 different questions from both Republican, half a dozen Republican and Democratic senators that he never received or believed he received, obviously stolen materials from Democratic senators' computers. That was another blatant untruth. We found we could not depend on Judge Kavanaugh to tell the truth under oath. We only learned the truth years later. We only learned the truth of what he had said untruthfully. After we reviewed the small portion of his White House record that Chairman Grassley was willing to request for this nomination. Time and time again, when confronted under oath with questions about his involvement in Bush-era scandals or controversial matters, Judge Kavanaugh misled the Senate. Now, the fact that he's misled the Senate over and over and over again, that does not make him guilty of sexual assault as a 17-year-old. Nor does the fact that he minimized the heavy drinking in his youth and misrepresented the misogyny in his yearbook. But it does go to the heart of Judge Kavanaugh's truthfulness anytime he's faced with potentially incriminating questions. Yesterday, Judge Kavanaugh falsely claimed over and over again that every other person Dr. Ford placed in the house said the assault didn't happen. That's just not true. And we know it's not. The only person who's claimed this incident didn't happen is Brett Kavanaugh. The others said they had no knowledge or memory of it, just as Dr. Ford assumed they would say, given that it was for them an ordinary night. And one of them even stated she believed Dr. Ford, which of course Judge Kavanaugh conveniently failed to acknowledge. Judge Kavanaugh's defiance and evasiveness, his vehement partisan attacks against members of this committee, in the face of powerful, incriminating testimony, surpassed even that of Clarence Thomas at the time of Anita Hill. He tried to portray Dr. Ford's allegation as part of a calculated and orchestrated political hit. My years as a prosecutor, I saw a lot of times when people try to blame the victim, not to own up to their own deeds. He angrily asserted baseless political tirades. He was all too eager to promote the false Republican talking point that Senator Feinstein was lying in wait with this allegation. He even claimed the allegations were driven by revenge on behalf of the Clintons. It's hard to make this stuff up. That amounts to conspiratorial madness. In my time in the Senate, I have never seen such volatility, partisanship, and a lack of judicial temperament from any nominee for any court in any administration. It's no secret that I have deep concerns about what a Justice Kavanaugh would mean for the rights of women, for workers, for health care, for unchecked presidential power, and other important issues. I also believe he's unfit to serve on our nation's highest court because of his history of misleading the Senate while under oath. But as serious as these concerns are, this is different. Voting to advance and ultimately confirm Judge Kavanaugh while he's under this dark cloud of suspicion will forever change the Senate and our nation's highest court. It will politicize the U.S. Supreme Court, a branch of our government that should be above politics. And for victims and survivors of sexual violence struggling with whether to come forward, the consequences may be even worse. Every one of us who has been a prosecutor has seen how hard it is sometimes for victims to come forth. And are we sending the signal that you stay there, don't come forth? You know, how this committee handles this nomination will be viewed as a reflection of how seriously our society views credible claims of sexual misconduct. During Dr. Ford's testimony, the National Sexual Assault Hotline saw an unprecedented 147% increase in calls. When survivors see us taking sexual assault seriously, they're empowered to come forward. If they see us callously sweeping it under the rug, I fear they'll have disastrous consequences. If victims think they'll never be believed, or will not matter even if they are believed, then why come forward at all? Dr. Ford deserves to be heard. And that must mean more than just checking a box. Remember, Dr. Ford did not spend her entire life preparing for this moment. She is not backed by the most powerful officials in our nation's government. She did not come here with a political agenda. She did not testify with a job promotion on the line. She did not evade our questions, and she did not demean our motives of either Republicans or Democrats. She instead plainly, with grace, and at times emotionally, recounted the trauma that she experienced as a 15-year-old girl. Trauma that has been haunting her for the 36 years since. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. I listened closely to both her and Judge Kavanaugh, and I believe her as I believed Anita Hill. I'll be voting no on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. He does not have the veracity nor the temperament for a lifetime appointment to the highest court in our nation. And no such nominee should be confirmed in the face of such serious, credible, and unresolved allegations of sexual assault.
Senator Graham.
Thank you. I know I'm a single white male from South Carolina, and I'm told I should shut up, but I will not shut up if that's okay, because I got here the same way everybody else did. The people in South Carolina voted for me and Senator Scott to be their voice, men and women, and I'm going to try to be their voice today, and maybe not just for South Carolina, but a little bit about what I think is going on here. Joe Biden, I can't believe we're saying this on our side. Listen to Joe. But Joe was right a lot. Joe Biden's a unique guy. If you had one last conversation before you die, you'd want to have it with Joe. You'd be around for a while. He's a decent guy. If he runs for president, he'd be hard to beat. He came to Senator Thurman's funeral and gave a long eulogy. And I asked him, Joe, I said, that was incredible. This can't help you in Delaware. He said, I just like the old guy. I didn't agree with him, and I didn't like some of the things he did in his life, but when I was down and out, he was there for me. And to my colleagues on the other side, this will end, and we'll see what we do next. I hope we can muster the ability to move forward. But some observations about where we find ourselves and how we got here. I wrote a book, and I think Senator Blumenthal is the only person I know that actually read it. It was online. I ran for president, and I got 1%, so I had my time to be president. Didn't go very far, and I lost. I didn't think Trump would win. I ran out of adjectives to describe about how I felt about his campaign. Well, he won and I lost, and he's president. And I'll try to help him where I can and say no when I must, and the election's over for me. I would like to tell him that you had a choice to make for the Supreme Court vacancy of Justice Kennedy. I think you did a good job, Mr. President. For somebody who's supposedly crazy and there's chaos everywhere, he did a good job here. Now, why difference between Gorsuch and Kennedy? Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. It's the Kennedy seat. If you don't get that, you're not paying much attention. Gorsuch is a even swap for Scalia. But this is high-stakes stuff, right? This is the seat where the guy in the middle is at risk. Kavanaugh clerked for Justice Kennedy. Would you have picked him? No. But you lost the election. And that does have consequences. When I said it about Obama winning, I meant it. Merrick Garland. Scalia dies in the election year, the last year of the term of President Obama. The primaries are already underway. Not in 100 years has anybody been nominated under that circumstance, so I don't think I did anything unfair with Garland. As to Sotomayor and Kagan, I was told on our side, you've got to keep them off the court because they're going to be a pro-choice vote. They hate guns. On and on and on. And I tried to go back to what this committee used to do. Strom Thurmond voted for Ginsburg. You'll never convince me that it was because he agreed with her philosophy. I think he saw in her a qualified person. Fritz Hollings voted for Scalia. The same is true. 96 and 97 votes. What's happened? Most of the nominees to the Supreme Court have never had a hearing. It was always just assumed if they're qualified and they're not hacks, that they're going to go forward. Elections do matter. When it comes to President Trump, elections do matter. Now, about the law, and to my friends who have been prosecutors. I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, and I've been a judge. Every woman who's been victimized needs to be heard. Count me in 1,000 times over. Count me in for the proposition for every one woman who comes forward, only God knows how many women and children go to their grave with the abuse. If you don't realize that, you just don't know this area of life. But you're going to be heard in the United States. I had a young man accused of sexual assault when I was in the Air Force as a defense attorney. The case eventually fell apart, and he almost killed himself. I had women who have been gang raped and didn't want to testify, but they did. Along with counselors, I sat up with them all night. Tough stuff. Emotional. Who to believe? I've been doing this legal stuff most of my life. I've never heard a more compelling defense of one's honor and integrity than I did from Brett Kavanaugh. He looked me in the eye, everybody in the eye, and he was mad, and he should have been mad. He could tell you where he was at and what he was doing during high school in a way that just blew me away. Brett Kavanaugh and women. If you're a gang rapist when you're a sophomore and a junior in high school, you don't let it go. Every woman who actually knows Brett Kavanaugh has come forward to say he is not that kind of guy. He has been at the highest level of public service, under tremendous scrutiny, 6 FBI investigations, and we missed the sophomore, junior gang rapist. We didn't miss it. It's much garbage. We're in the twilight zone, and here's what I would say. Miss Ford. All I can say about Miss Ford, I feel sorry for her, and I do believe something happened to her, and I don't know when and where, but I don't believe it was Brett Kavanaugh. And as a prosecutor, you couldn't get out of the batter's box, because in America, before you can accuse somebody of a crime, you have to tell them when it happened and where it happened, and you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt it did happen. The reason this case will never be brought in Maryland or anywhere else, you just can't get there. If you wanted to get a warrant, which is a probable cause standard, to search or arrest somebody, you got to prove by probable cause where it happened and when it happened. How are you supposed to defend yourself? Is the burden really on you to prove that you were not at a party 35 years ago and they won't tell you where it was and when it was? So all I can say is that under any reasonable standard, any concept of the rule of law, this would not go forward. There have been 5 allegations here. The 5th allegation was brought to me by Senator Whitehouse, who did absolutely the right thing. Somebody contacted him in Rhode Island and said a friend of his was on a boat with Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh, and they treated her badly. He went down and beat him up, and she won't come forward. I said, well, I'll make sure I'll join with you. Let the FBI look at it. And turned out not to be true. The 4th allegation was an anonymous allegation, a letter without a date or a return address sent to Corey Gardner just a few days ago. And he turned it over to the committee, and somebody on that side leaked it to NBC News, and it made it on the news, the 4th allegation. That really bothers me. I don't know what's going on over there, but that's not right. It was somebody over there. Now, about Miss Ford. I feel really bad that she wanted to remain anonymous and could not. The one thing I know for sure is that Dianne Feinstein would not do this and did not do this. But I know for sure somebody did. It wasn't chatter from a friend. 3 groups had this letter that was requested to be anonymous. Dianne Feinstein and her staff, the Congresswoman from California and her staff, and the lawyers. Somebody betrayed her trust, and if you can't figure out why, you shouldn't be driving. To delay this hearing, to set in motion the destruction of this man, to keep this seat open past the election. That I know beyond any doubt. What else do I know? I about fell out of my chair when Dr. Ford said yesterday, I didn't know you would be willing to come to me. The email interactions between this committee and her lawyers, my staff would still welcome the opportunity to speak with Dr. Ford at any time and any place convenient to her. Come to us or we to you. I'm willing to have my staff travel to Dr. Ford in California or anywhere else to obtain her testimony, September the 19th. Well, that wouldn't fit in the plan. It wouldn't be public, and it would get over with sooner than people wanted. I don't know what to believe, but I tend to believe that Dr. Ford did not know about this invitation. And I've been a lawyer most of my adult life, and somebody needs to ask the question to her lawyers, how could she not know about this? Are you beginning to understand what's been going on for a very long time in this case? It's not that hard to figure out. So if this is the new standard, the accusation proves itself to those who want to ask questions. You hate women. God help us all. If the new standard for the committee is that there's no presumption of anything, that you have to prove why somebody would accuse you. Not just say, I didn't do it, and here's why I didn't do it. But you got to prove the motives of your accuser. God help us all. The Avenatti moment tells you what's going to happen if we keep this farce going. Plenty of time, plenty of opportunities to get to the truth. This has never been about the truth. This has been about delay and destruction. And if we reward this, it is the end of good people wanting to be judges. It is the end of any concept of the rule of law. It's the beginning of a process that will tear this country apart. And if I am chairman,